Did the Emperor ever truly see the abyss, or did the abyss simply gaze back and laugh? The Imperium whispers this question across starless voids, in the hollow corridors of titanic warships and the shattered spires of forgotten hive worlds. On Atraxis Prime, an inauspicious rift had torn in the fabric of reality, dismissed as minor by an overconfident administratum. But those who ventured near spoke only of silence so profound it gnawed at reason itself. Shadows moved where no light fell, and the air trembled with an echo of laughter not meant for mortal ears. Psykers screamed in unison, their minds unraveling under the weight of a presence that was older than the stars themselves. Bolter fire shredded illusions, yet could not pierce the impossible geometry that twisted the sky. The planet's once vibrant surface had become a labyrinth of jagged stone and veins of burning ichor, as if the planet's soul were bleeding into a waiting warp. In the command sanctum, Inquisitor Sivan Morth pondered the reports. His mind, sharpened by decades of purging heresy, recoiled at the anomalies. The rift, he realized, was no ordinary warp tear. Sensors registered fluctuations in reality, faint but insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the skin of the universe. Servitors' ocular lenses flickered with static visions, towering demons walking through the fabric of the stars, eyes filled with predatory cunning. Orders from the Ordo Malleus were clear: contain, study, report. Yet Morth could not shake the dread crawling through his synaptic pathways. Something far greater than Daemonic, something that had waited for eons, had awakened. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever curious, insisted on scanning, their cogitator priests murmuring incantations to stabilize reality long enough for data retrieval. But as probes pierced the rift, they returned images that contradicted every law of physics and faith, as if reality itself were pleading in riddles no human mind could solve. The first strike came without warning. A regiment of Astra Militarum was deployed to secure the perimeter, their last guns sputtering against creatures of smoke and flame. Shadows in humanoid form struck without warning, each movement impossibly swift. Survivors described hallucinatory vistas, cities crumbling into water, mountains folding like parchment, and the sky turning to liquid obsidian. Even the Space Marines, those paragons of human resilience, faltered under the assault. Their bolters roared, yet the enemy seemed to fracture and reform, emerging from places that should not exist. Chaplain Decimus fell in the ensuing chaos, his final prayers fragmented by screams that seemed to emanate from his own skull. Morth recorded everything, yet words failed him. Nothing in the Librarius or the Index Astartes contained a description for what was happening. The rift was no doorway. It was a predator, patient and insatiable, and Atraxis Prime had become its first meal. The survivors' nightmares became shared visions. Psykers, tethered to the warp, described landscapes of impossible geometry, where stars were drawn in endless spirals and the dead conversed with the living in languages that tasted of blood and rust. Time fractured. A guardsman swore he lived the same death thrice before his mind collapsed, while a tech priest recorded events that had not yet occurred. Morth's inquisitorial retinue began to doubt the very nature of reality. The Adeptus Mechanicus insisted that such temporal dissonance could be catalogued, yet the fabric of causality twisted further with every experiment. Each pulse of the rift sang with silent music, notes that made hearts race and memories bleed. Devotees of the Emperor prayed fervently, but their prayers returned distorted, as if the Immaterium itself were mocking the Imperial creed. And in the midst of this, something watched them through the veil, patient, formless, and immensely hungry. A flashback showed the planet before corruption, Atraxis Prime, a world of towering spires and sacred forges, home to a chapter of Space Marines unknown to the broader Imperium, dedicated to guarding a relic whose nature was forbidden even in whispered lore. The relic was rumored to contain a fragment of the Emperor's lost vision, a shard of truth capable of reshaping worlds. Its guardians perished in silence, their deaths unrecorded save for cryptic glyphs etched into ruined fortresses. In that moment, The rift was no accident, but a lure. The minor demonic classification had been deliberate misdirection, an underestimation that cost the lives of thousands. As Morth's log continued, he realized the rift mirrored the relic's power, a mirror turned outward, showing the fragility of all things held sacred. The rift pulsed in rhythm with unseen drums, and reality flinched. Warp fire crept across continents, sparking spontaneous conflagrations that devoured life indiscriminately. Demons, grotesque in form, emerged in waves, but none lingered in the material plane. They were messengers, heralds of something greater. The Imperium's finest, space marines, adeptus arbites, and psykers alike, fell in patterns reminiscent of an intricate design, as if the rift orchestrated their demise to communicate a truth beyond mortal comprehension. Morth's own body bore the marks of psychic backlash, visions of fallen civilizations flooding his mind. Each pulse revealed glimpses of the future, a galaxy reshaped by forces beyond comprehension, civilizations grinding beneath the march of unholy divinities. The ecclesiarchy sent missionaries, and their faith proved both shield and chain. The rift seemed to respond, twisting prayers into new forms, creating specters that mimicked familiar saints and angels but with eyes that glimmered with malevolence. Choirs sang in discord, their voices splitting the air like shattered glass, and even the most devout faltered. The Inquisition debated whether the rift was a test of faith or a weapon beyond imagining. Morth, alone in his chamber, stared into the depths of a cogitator displaying unholy visions. Worlds reduced to ash, star systems orbiting invisible tyrants, and a single figure standing at the center, unblinking, patient, as if waiting for the Imperium to notice it. Recon teams dispatched beyond the rift reported landscapes impossible to describe. Mountains twisted into towers of bone. Oceans boiled into crystal. Skies shimmered with colors no human eye had ever catalogued. One survivor returned speaking only in riddles, claiming that the rift was alive, that it breathed, hungered, and judged. Even heretical psykers whispered that the void itself was sentient, and Atraxis Prime merely its first theater. Morth watched these reports with increasing unease, recognizing a pattern in chaos. The rift had a purpose, one woven over millennia, and it had chosen this era to act. The tech priests of the Mechanicus attempted to harness the rift's energy, seeking knowledge forbidden even in the most secretive cogitator archives. Their experiments yielded catastrophic results. Servitors disintegrated mid-prayer, machinery warped into impossible shapes, and recorded data rearranged itself spontaneously. Morth realized that Atraxis Prime's fate was entwined with the rift's whims, and the planet itself was becoming a vessel for something neither god nor demon had birthed. Every attempt to contain it failed. Every effort to observe it merely invited more corruption. Even the Emperor's light, distant and unwavering, seemed diminished here. A council of war convened aboard the orbiting battle barge Vigilant Sanctum. Here, the commanders argued over containment, extermination, or retreat. Yet as they spoke, Morth noted an anomaly. Time itself lagged, words repeated, faces flickered. The barge's reality was already infected by the rift. Space Marines whispered of dreams where they were already dead, fighting wars that had not yet occurred. Even bolters misfired, firing into voids unseen. The rift was teaching them despair as a lesson, bending hope into a weapon against those who clung to it. The rift's surface shimmered, revealing glimpses of other worlds, worlds uncounted, each folded into the warp, each screaming silently beneath the weight of something colossal. Morth's log described the shapes, though he knew language could not contain them. Spires like jagged teeth, seas of molten crystal, and an ever-watching sky that mirrored the souls of those who gazed upon it. He saw, or believed he saw, fragments of the Emperor's own throne world, unmade and reformed in the image of the void. Then the final assault began. Demons, psykers, and the remnants of human soldiery clashed in a cacophony of fire and bone. Reality buckled, and the planet itself groaned in pain. Morth, recording frantically, realized the rift's true nature. It was not a door, not a tier, but a judgment. The minor demonic classification had been a lie, a trivialization of inevitability. The rift was a reckoning, an event the Imperium was never meant to survive. And yet, at the apex of destruction, a single pulse radiated outward, quiet, deliberate in its malice. In the aftermath, silence fell like a shroud. The surviving Vox signals were fractured, filled with static and whispers of impossible truths. Morth's log ended abruptly, his final words consumed by a distortion that crawled across the galaxy. Something moved within the rift, something watching, waiting for another misstep, another lie. And then, a whisper. The rift had shifted, subtly, just enough to hint that Atraxis Prime's devastation was only the beginning. Across the void, stars flickered. Somewhere unknowable, something smiled. The rift had withdrawn into silence, but Atraxis Prime remained a hushed cathedral of grief, its skies draped in ash and memory. Survivors staggered across landscapes scarred by impossible geometries, haunted by specters that bore the faces of the dead. Space Marines walked like revenants among the ruins, their armor dulled by dust and despair, each step a litany of the lives they could not save. Psykers, trembling beneath the weight of knowledge, muttered fragments of forbidden truth, unable to discern whether they gazed into the warp or into the eyes of the Emperor himself. Every heartbeat resonated with uncertainty. Faith itself seemed frayed, as though the rift had siphoned belief into its patient maw. Servitors continued their labor, performing rites of maintenance over relics whose purpose had already decayed into shadow, as if the machines themselves understood some cosmic secret the flesh could not endure. In the orbiting vigilant sanctum, Inquisitor Morth convened a tribunal of war. Political intrigue hung thick in the recycled air. Imperial governors whispered accusations of cowardice, while ecclesiarchs argued over the sanctity of sacrifices. Tension rippled like energy in an overcharged plasma coil. The Adeptus Mechanicus insisted that the rift's energy be studied, even as battle brothers condemned their hubris. Loyalty fractured along subtle lines. Some declared that Morth's caution bordered on heresy, while others whispered that the Imperium had already failed Atraxis Prime. Silent observers, hidden in the shadows, recorded each slight and hesitation. In whispered corridors of power, the machinery of betrayal moved as efficiently as the engines of war. The tribunal dissolved into factions, each more certain than the last that they alone understood the path to survival, even as Atraxis Prime smoldered beneath a quiet, indifferent void. The survivors who wandered the blasted plains spoke of whispers that rose with the wind, muttering in languages not heard since the age of strife. Pilgrims who once prayed with fervor found their prayers unanswered, replaced by visions of infinite corridors, populated with empty thrones and forgotten emperors. A lone chaplain, Father Tarek, wandered these fields, recording the visions in trembling glyphs, questioning not only the rift but the meaning of faith itself. His sermons, once fiery with zeal, became silent meditations on despair, performed only for the stones, the smoke, and the echoes of past wars. Soldiers who lingered too long fell into the same trance, their loyalty fracturing under the weight of revelation. Each night, Atraxis Prime seemed to remember itself differently, reshaping its wounds and scars into something that mocked memory, as if the world itself were testing the patience of the Emperor's subjects. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever relentless, probed deeper into the rift's lingering energy. Servitors in ritualistic formation channeled arcane power through cogitator arrays, uncovering traces of entities older than the Imperium itself. One tech priest, Magos Tularis, claimed to have glimpsed the shattered throne, a concept so blasphemous that the words themselves trembled in the act of recording. His fellow priests debated whether the rift was sentient, a reflection of the relic's corruption, or an artifact of the void's own desire. In secret, Tularis's voice quavered as he revealed glimpses of an agenda that spanned millennia. The rift, he claimed, had been waiting, shaping events in silence, preparing the Imperium to fail. Each revelation poisoned the minds of those who listened, leaving a residue of doubt that would not be washed away by prayer, bolter, or reason. In a memory of battles past, the Space Marines chapter once assigned to Atraxis Prime appeared in visions like statues frozen mid-strike. They were betrayed by their own succubus-like allies, seduced into acts against the Codex, leaving only scattered glyphs and echoes. Morth, reviewing these fragments, saw patterns: heresy interwoven with loyalty, valor twisted into surrender, devotion warped into madness. The survivors' recollections, too, became untrustworthy. Each recounted the same events differently, as if the planet itself reshaped memory to erode certainty. Even the most devout soldiers doubted the worth of obedience. In this shadow of doubt, the smallest acts of selfishness became magnified, political rivalries intensified, and the smallest betrayal festered like a wound in the heart of the Imperium. Within the orbiting barge, psykers' dreams bled into reality. They described visions of impossible hierarchies, demonic lords acting as governors, manipulating human fealty, twisting sanctity into theater. A single sister of battle claimed to have seen a future in which the ecclesiarchy itself declared the rift a sacred emissary, yet its true purpose remained obscured. Faith faltered where certainty once reigned, and whispers spread that perhaps the Emperor's light had abandoned Atraxis Prime entirely. Morth's personal conviction wavered as he recognized the subtle infection of doubt. Even the purest loyalty could be weaponized against itself. Scattered patrols discovered ruins of a previous cult, ancient even before the Imperium's rise, devoted to the Silent One, an entity whose name was forbidden in the lexicon of all orders. They had left behind mechanical idols, warped scripture, and the unmistakable stench of warp contamination. The cult's vision, cryptic but consistent, suggested the rift's appearance was preordained. Survivors who read the scripts were driven to incoherence. Dreams became prophetic nightmares, each more horrifyingly detailed than the last. The Imperium's heroes found themselves questioning the foundation of all they had sworn to protect. Flashbacks revealed the relic once guarded on Atraxis Prime, a crystalline vessel of light and shadow. Its fragments resonated with the rift, creating echoes of alternate realities. A lone librarian, Valric, touched the relic, and in that instant, he saw thousands of potential destinies, all ending in ruin. He fell silent, unable to share what he had witnessed. The memory lingered, transmitted psychically to those near him, feeding unease and suspicion. What was meant to be a tool of guidance had become a mirror reflecting the Imperium's inevitable decay. The planetary governors argued with ecclesiarchs over the treatment of survivors. Accusations flew like shards of glass. Loyalty was measured in obedience to flawed doctrine rather than morality. Some declared that Morth was too cautious, while others whispered that he had already succumbed to corruption, his inquisitorial authority tainted. The subtle fractures widened, and betrayal began to gestate in silence. Secret transmissions suggested that not all sought survival. Some sought power, exploiting the rift's lingering terror to manipulate the Empire's machinery for personal ascendancy. On the barren plains, soldiers continued patrols that led nowhere, yet each mission returned with the same message. The rift's influence had spread beyond Atraxis Prime. Space itself seemed altered. Stars shivered, and void currents carried whispers of impossible alliances. Each discovery deepened the question: was the rift merely a local catastrophe, or the harbinger of systemic collapse across the Imperium? The faithful began to see signs where none should exist, and subtle heresies crept into doctrine, tolerated for the sake of survival. In the cathedrals of ruins, survivors witnessed statues weeping ichor, icons melting into indistinct faces. A low chant arose spontaneously from among them, unprompted, repeating words that were not in any known language. Father Tarek observed this silently, recording the phenomenon, aware that the collective faith was being reshaped, bent into something unknowable. Loyalty had become malleable, faith unstable. Even the memory of the Emperor's victory seemed to waver in these moments. A single revelation shattered the remaining certainty. During a hidden audit of the relic's archives, Inquisitor Morth discovered evidence that the so-called minor rift had not been a random event. It had been orchestrated by human hands, by traitors whose names were long erased from records, whose motives were hidden beneath layers of false doctrine. The betrayal was not in action, but in design. Someone had wanted Atrax's Prime broken, and the rift had been the instrument of their will. As Morth stared at the records, a whisper echoed in his mind, one that was not his own. You were always meant to watch, and now to understand. The rift's shadow reached beyond Atrax's Prime, threading like a spider's web through the warp, touching worlds uncounted and yet intimately familiar. On the forge world of Tharagonix, Magos Dominus Halvik recorded fluctuations in the planetary manufactorum, noting machinery that shivered as if alive. Servitors paused mid-task, eyes rolling back to see specters that should not exist. Halvik's mind strained to contain the visions, fleets immolating themselves in warp storms, loyal legions turned against allies, saints whispering blasphemies with the authority of Scripture. Even the Emperor's light, distant and revered, seemed dimmer here. Halvik whispered prayers under his breath, each one fracturing into multiple forms, as if reality itself disagreed. The universe felt less a bastion of order than a hollow cathedral echoing with an unseen deity's amusement. Faith had become a prism, devotion a weapon against its holder. In the orbit above a dying star, the Space Marine Librarius of the Crimson Vengeance chapter meditated. Psyker visions tore through his skull like shards of frozen fire, revealing entire campaigns before they occurred. His fellow battle brothers did not sleep. Some prayed, some wept, others stared blankly at the void, sensing the universe fold around their thoughts. Memories of past glories, the triumphs of 1,000 campaigns, felt hollow in the face of the rift's subtle omnipresence. Every victory, every heroic sacrifice, appeared as though orchestrated by something older, something that knew their faith and tested it. When he opened his eyes, he saw the stars themselves twisting, the constellations forming shapes that were never meant to exist. The librarian recorded everything, but in the silence of the void, even his cogitator seemed afraid. The ecclesiarchy convened on a decrepit hab block on Vervan IX. Missionaries argued doctrine with the fervor of zealots, unaware that their words were becoming meaningless echoes. The faithful trembled as visions of the rift seeped into the sermons, twisting hymns into prophecies of doom. Priests whispered of hidden heresies buried within sacred texts, conspiracies older than the Imperium itself. One acolyte confessed, his voice breaking, that he could see the lie, that every crusade, every triumph, had been a small part of a pattern leading to inevitable devastation. Some condemned him as possessed. Others felt an unholy recognition in his words. Across the hab block, shadows crept beneath the flickering light, almost sentient in their patience. The line between divinity and deception blurred. Faith became as dangerous as any weapon, as corruptible as the flesh it sought to save. A sudden psychic surge ripped through the void, startling fleets of the Astra Militarum engaged in border conflicts. Entire regiments collapsed as visions of impossible futures burned into their minds, planets consumed by fire, worlds reconstituted into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Commanders debated whether this was warp interference or divine wrath, but neither answer comforted them. Survivors described standing amidst enemies that bore their own faces, firing weapons that were both theirs and not theirs, fighting wars that had never been waged yet had already ended in slaughter. In these brief, agonizing bursts, the soldiers glimpsed the scope of the rift. It was no longer an isolated event, but a contagion in the fabric of existence itself. Even the bravest hearts shook. On the shattered moon of Asver Prime, Inquisitor Morth ventured alone into the ruins of a cathedral consumed by the rift's remnants. Here, the bones of centuries-old saints lay scattered among melted icons, forming patterns that resonated psychically with the relic once housed on Atraxis Prime. Morth could feel his thoughts being rewritten by some slow, methodical force. Memories of victories, of moral certainties, began to fray. He realized that loyalty, heroism, and righteousness were not absolutes but tools for a larger design he could barely comprehend. In the whispers of the ruined nave, he heard the faint murmur of the architects of betrayal, the orchestrators of the rift, and recognized a pattern so deliberate that it shook him to the core. The galaxy itself seemed poised to obey a will older than the Emperor. Flashbacks of the Horus heresy bled into the present, seen through fractured psyker visions, the betrayal of Luna wolves, the murder of loyalist chapters, the subtle manipulations of chaos, all resonated with the pattern emerging from Atraxis Prime's rift. It was not a coincidence, not a series of unfortunate events, but a long-game strategy spanning millennia. The rift was a tool, the culmination of a hidden agenda buried beneath layers of imperial orthodoxy. Even the Emperor's victories now seemed provisional, temporary bulwarks against inevitability as old as the stars. Loyalty and righteousness, carefully nurtured over 10,000 years, were revealed as fragile constructs, easily bent by knowledge only the warp could grant. Aboard the Vigilant Sanctum, psykers linked to the rift described a vision of Terra itself, distorted, reshaped, the Emperor's throne empty, illuminated by a light not his own. The Space Marines guarding the throne room felt their faith shiver. Some prayed for guidance, some questioned their oaths. Librarian Valric screamed as he realized that the rift had left a fragment behind, a seed capable of rewriting the galaxy's moral architecture. Even those untouched by psychic influence felt a creeping despair. The Imperium, mighty and infinite in its self-belief, was fragile beyond imagining. The rift's legacy was not destruction alone, but a lesson. Belief could be engineered, loyalty manipulated, and the Emperor's will misrepresented to achieve ends no mortal had yet comprehended. The Adeptus Mechanicus uncovered traces of heretical manipulation on worlds far from Atraxis Prime, ancient servitors, encoded with secrets predating the Unification Wars, whispered directives when reawakened, hinting at conspiracies buried in the bones of creation itself. Magos Dominus Halvik realized that some forces had shaped human history intentionally, guiding crusades, wars, and rebellions like chess pieces. The revelation fractured the minds of those present. What had been history was not history at all, but theater, meticulously staged for reasons only the architects understood. The galaxy's chronology itself had become suspect. Faith, memory, and knowledge were destabilized simultaneously, leaving survivors adrift in uncertainty and terror. On a distant battlefield, loyalist space marines fought demons that appeared to know their every tactic before it happened. Bolter fire tore through impossibility, and yet their enemies reformed, anticipating every maneuver. Chaplain Decimus's final rites were interrupted by visions of his own death, repeated infinitely, a reflection of the galaxy's growing temporal instability. Each act of courage became simultaneously heroic and meaningless. The warriors understood only one truth: their universe was being rewritten beneath them, and no creed, chapter, or chapter master could prevent the tide of inevitability. In quiet halls of the derelict spire, the remnants of a once powerful imperial governor convened in secret. Here, it was revealed that Atraxis Prime's minor rift had been activated intentionally by factions of the Imperium itself, agents of an agenda hidden for centuries. The revelation shattered the remaining certainty of those present. Some high-ranking leaders had been complicit, ensuring that loyalty, faith, and obedience could be manipulated to prepare the galaxy for an event so profound that it could unseat even the Emperor's own dominion. Doubt became a weapon and betrayal a principle. The fragile bonds of allegiance began to dissolve like ash in the wind. On the remnants of Terra's orbiting sanctuaries, psykers linked to the Astronomicon described the vision of the silent architect, a being responsible for embedding the rift into reality. Its presence spanned time itself, predating the Emperor, the Old Ones, even the Horus heresy. The galaxy shuddered as understanding dawned. The rift was a manifestation of this architect's will, and every war, every crusade, every act of devotion was a step in a plan spanning eons. The Imperium's light, mighty though it seemed, was merely a flicker in a design far larger than comprehension allowed. Those who perceived the truth wept silently, for they understood that history had been orchestrated, belief manipulated, and survival contingent on forces they could not hope to oppose. Finally, Inquisitor Morth, standing on the edge of a shattered void gate, beheld the full scale of the rift's manipulation. Fragments of truth, whispered across millennia, converged into a singular revelation. Atraxis Prime had not been the beginning, but a rehearsal. The Imperium itself was but a scaffold, a stage for the machinations of an intelligence older than the stars. And as the rift pulsed, linking countless worlds in psychic resonance, Morth understood the final dreadful implication. The galaxy's free will had been an illusion, its faith a carefully constructed vector. The architect was patient, and now, at last, it revealed the first overt act of its grand design. The stars themselves shifted, and a silent, deliberate malevolence smiled across the void. The void above Atraxis Prime trembled, not with wind or gravity, but with expectation. Fleets held in suspended orbit, guns primed, engines silent, as if the universe itself waited with bated breath. Space Marines knelt in the gloom, bolters resting on knees, their helmets reflecting fractured stars. Psykers muttered prayers that twisted in syntax and meaning, their voices a tapestry of fear and reverence. The rift's lingering pulse reverberated through the minds of all who gazed upon it, a metronome counting the heartbeats of inevitability. In this suffocating silence, the weight of past choices pressed upon every soul. Oaths broken, heresies tolerated, loyalties bent to fragile arcs of convenience. The galaxy seemed to fold inward, collapsing upon itself as the consequences of centuries of faith and treachery gathered in quiet, relentless anticipation. On the storm-scarred surface, Father Tarek walked among the ruins of his flock, his cowl drawn low. The air was thick with the smell of burning incense, melted icons, and the acrid tang of psychic feedback. Survivors shuffled through ash, murmuring confessions to the stones, to the ghosts, to the stars. Every prayer felt inadequate, every hymn hollow, yet Tarek pressed onward. His mind lingered on the faces of those lost to the rift, to ambition, to betrayal. Memories of battles won in the name of the Emperor, victories once thought eternal, now twisted into instruments of despair. Each footstep became a measure of grief, a testament to devotion that no longer guaranteed survival. Even as Tarek's voice rose in lamentation, the wind carried whispers not meant for mortal ears, hints of an orchestration beyond comprehension. Across the void, Inquisitor Morth observed fleets of the Adeptus Astartes converging on fractured systems. Each strike force moved like a puppet guided by unseen hands, their orders clear yet subtly distorted. Morth's own retinue argued over interpretation, the difference between obedience and indoctrination, as if every command contained a hidden fracture. Librarians channeled visions of worlds consumed in advance, of allies betraying allies. Yet even these forewarnings were incomplete, fragments of an architecture that had long outpaced understanding. Morth recorded every anomaly with trembling hands, aware that the rift's influence had already extended beyond Atraxis Prime, infecting the decisions of even the most disciplined commanders. Faith, strategy, and reason collided, forming a lattice of dread, each strand trembling under the weight of inevitability. Flashbacks emerged like shadows across the psykers' minds, the Horus heresy replayed with subtle variations, every act of treachery and loyalty magnified and refracted, showing the echoes of Atraxis Prime's rift woven into history itself. Sons of the Emperor, once paragons of virtue, appeared in visions as instruments of the architect's design, each betrayal and sacrifice carefully timed across millennia. Even the Emperor's victory seemed provisional temporary safeguards in a design that did not require human approval. Veterans of the old wars wept silently, recognizing in these visions a cruel symmetry that had always existed. A pattern that ensured loyalty itself became a tool, and devotion a weapon. Memory became unreliable, reality optional, and hope a fragile candle threatened by unseen winds. On Farragon Ix, Magos Dominus Halvik recorded fluctuations in Manufactoria power cores, noting anomalies that defied logic. Machines operated without command, their servo arms performing tasks that seemed anticipatory, as though the planet itself understood the architecture of the rift. Servitors emitted low, unmodulated tones, vibrating with resonance that drove some tech priests to madness. Halvik realized with dread that Atraxis Prime's rift was a node in a network, a lattice connecting distant worlds in psychic and physical influence. Each spark of energy, each hum of machinery, carried fragments of ancient intention. The galaxy was reshaping itself quietly, inexorably, around consequences that had been orchestrated for centuries. Even the Emperor's light could not illuminate the machinery of fate now in motion. In orbit above Vervan Ix, the Adeptus Arbites attempted to maintain order as planetary governors argued over fleets, loyalties, and evacuations. Every decision seemed preordained, the outcome written before action began. The governors, once confident in their authority, whispered accusations and threats, unaware that subtle manipulations had already undermined their power. Even the ecclesiarchy faltered. Priests who once declared divine certainty now wavered, reading signs that contradicted scripture. A single acolyte, terrified, suggested that the Imperium itself had been staged as part of a larger design. The whispers spread, infecting minds, creating hesitation where obedience had been absolute. In the silence, the rift's pulse could be felt faintly, a heartbeat marking the gathering storm. A sudden eruption on the surface of Atraxis Prime reminded all of mortality, a detonation in a warp-corrupted sector, tearing open a temporary fissure through which demonic forms emerged briefly before being consumed by the planet's collapsing crust. Space Marines and Astra Militarum forces reacted with precision and ferocity, yet even their coordinated fury could not halt the psychic resonance radiating outward. Soldiers described visions of their own deaths, repeated infinitely, mirrored across countless timelines. Fear and courage intertwined, creating an intricate lattice of human emotion that the rift absorbed like energy. The air, thick with ash and ozone, carried a weight beyond comprehension. The universe was about to respond to centuries of lies and orchestrated faith. Within the ruins of Tura's orbiting sanctuaries, psykers linked to the Astronomicon described a vision of the silent architect, not as a being but as an intelligence folded into reality itself. Time appeared to stretch and compress simultaneously. The psalms of saints and the screams of traitors overlapped in the same psychic resonance. Even the Emperor's throne world shimmered, its light flickering under scrutiny. Those who perceived this truth collapsed, their minds incapable of holding the scale of the revelation. Some prayed, some cried, some screamed, but no response emerged. The universe had become both confession and tribunal, and every observer realized that all belief, all devotion, and all righteousness were threads in a tapestry that no mortal could alter. On a distant battlefield in the Sigmetum Obscurus, Space Marines of the Crimson Vengeance chapter clashed with Chaos cultists who moved with preternatural knowledge of their strategies. Bolter fire tore through impossibility. Psychic shields bent against attacks foreseen and countered before they were executed. Chaplain Decimus's final rites were repeated endlessly in visions, revealing a lattice of inevitabilities that connected every death, every act of loyalty, every betrayal. Each act of courage seemed both heroic and futile, a testimony to devotion trapped in an architecture beyond comprehension. The galaxy itself waited, tense and silent, as if holding breath before a strike that would render all these sacrifices meaningless. In the cathedrals of ruined worlds, survivors whispered of icons that wept ichor and statues that turned their eyes toward impossible directions. Father Turek wandered these halls, recording every anomaly, aware that faith itself had become weaponized by the rift's lingering presence. Devotion, previously absolute, now fractured into doubt, hesitation, and moral rot. The cost of obedience became clear. To serve was to be complicit in outcomes beyond one's comprehension. Shadows of betrayal, previously subtle, now grew like thorns into every act, every command, every whispered prayer. Silence and observation became as dangerous as war itself, for the universe had learned patience and subtlety. Flashbacks returned to the heresy, but now with overlays of Atraxas Prime's rift, Horus's betrayal, Logar's devotion, Magnus's forbidden knowledge, all cast as facets of a single coordinated design. Even the Emperor's strategic interventions appeared as temporary barriers, mere scaffolding to sustain life long enough for a grand revelation. Warriors and priests understood, in a moment of gut-deep terror, that the galaxy itself was a stage, prearranged, rehearsed, and manipulated over millennia. The rift had only revealed the broader architecture, and Atraxas Prime was but the opening act of a performance whose end remained unknown. Finally, Inquisitor Morth stood upon a shattered void gate overlooking a segment of space now woven with rift energy. The pulse of the lattice reached out like tendrils, touching distant stars and planets, binding them in patterns invisible to mortal eyes. Morth realized the final truth. Every war, every betrayal, every act of devotion had been anticipated, orchestrated, and manipulated for the silent architect's design. And as he gazed into the abyss, a sudden rupture opened before him. The void blinked, and he glimpsed Terra, not as a beacon of the Emperor, but as the first node of the architect's grand design. The stars shifted. The Imperium had no defense. Fate itself prepared to strike. The pulse of the rift surged, devouring the void like a heartbeat made of fire. Fleets shattered as warp-twisted energy lanced through hulls, igniting reactors in silent explosions that reverberated across light years. Space Marines charged without hesitation, bolters firing into enemies that phased in and out of existence, their own weapons bending against the architecture of inevitability. In the command deck of the Vigilant Sanctum, Morth's retinue screamed in unison, caught between vision and reality. Every choice felt predetermined, every act heroic and meaningless simultaneously. The universe trembled, a cathedral of stars shaking as if acknowledging the gravity of this singular confrontation. Silence and fury existed together, each moment stretched across eternity. Father Turek knelt on the ashen plains of Atraxas Prime, his chants slicing through the psychic resonance like knives. Around him, survivors huddled in broken walls and melted icons, their eyes wide with the recognition of the incomprehensible. The demonic forms, no longer restrained, pulsed in patterns that mirrored their own memories, shaping themselves to taunt and torment. Turek lifted his hands, begging the Emperor's light to descend, to intervene, to make real the meaning of faith. Yet the rift answered with silence, or perhaps a smile. He felt the weight of every soul lost, every oath betrayed, pressing upon him, and knew that devotion itself had become a trial more cruel than the weapons of mortal men. The fleets above fractured, each vessel caught in flux as the rift's lattice pulsed outward. Commanders found their orders subverted, navigational data twisted into paradox. Psykers screamed in communion, linking thoughts across fleets in visions that no mortal mind could sustain. In one instant, a regiment of loyalists faced an enemy identical to themselves, their weapons mirrored in hand, their intentions reversed. Bolters roared, torpedoes detonated, and yet every act felt rehearsed, a part of a cosmic choreography that had long been written. The cost of obedience became clear. Even valor might serve the designs of a power older than the stars. Every victory, every heroic act, now trembled on the edge between salvation and oblivion. Flashbacks tore through the minds of survivors. The Horus heresy replayed, each betrayal interlaced with the faint pulse of Atraxas Prime's rift, revealing a continuum of manipulation. Logar's heresies, Magnus's forbidden knowledge, And even the Emperor's interventions appeared as fragments of a pattern intended to cultivate compliance, devotion, and despair in equal measure. Space Marines who had once sworn eternal loyalty saw themselves mirrored in the instruments of betrayal, a lattice connecting every era and every war. Faith, courage, and duty no longer existed as absolutes. They were vectors, carefully measured, refined across millennia to ensure the galaxy marched to a single, inevitable rhythm. Memory faltered, history trembled, and the living felt the weight of every soul ever lost or manipulated in the course of Imperial history. On Theragon Ix, Magos Dominus Halvik's servitors labored amid the chaos, machinery vibrating with a resonance that seemed conscious. Halvik himself trembled as cogitator screens displayed outcomes not yet realized, probabilities that resolved themselves into preordained truth. Fleets ignited and disappeared, psalms were twisted into psychic weapons, and the planet itself shifted subtly beneath their feet, as if reality itself had become a mechanism of judgment. Each act of science, of engineering, became a desperate attempt to wrest control from a lattice older than human conception. He muttered prayers to the Omnissiah, knowing even its light was filtered, delayed, and possibly irrelevant. Every cog, every data stream, every servitor hum was absorbed into the architecture of the Rift's will. Across the surface of Atraxis Prime, the Crimson Vengeance chapter confronted demons that phased in and out of the material plane. Chaplain Decimus led the charge, his Crozius blazing with psychic resonance, striking foes that seemed to anticipate every motion. Each kill was both triumph and repetition, the enemies endlessly reconstructing themselves to mirror their attackers. Marines screamed, bolters thundered, and the ground cracked beneath them as reality shivered. In the psychic glare, comrades appeared dead 1,000 times over, their deaths informing their own courage. Each moment became both battlefield and memory, a temporal prism where sacrifice and futility were inseparable. Faith became as sharp as the weapons they bore. Devotion itself became a blade against the soul, testing every soldier to the edge of endurance. In orbit above Terra, psykers linked to the Astronomicon screamed in unison, visions overlapping, the silent architect, the rift, and the lattice of history itself. They described an intelligence folded into reality, ancient, patient, and aware of every thought of every mortal being across 10,000 years. The Emperor's throne flickered in psychic perception, a beacon dimmed by the lattice's interference. Some psykers collapsed, some screamed, some whispered prophecies of unending conflict. The Imperium's light was insufficient, its reach fragile. Observers realized that even the most sacred vessels of faith had been complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in a choreography that the galaxy itself now enacted. Every war, every crusade, every act of devotion had been anticipated. Every betrayal had been cultivated. The scale of orchestration was infinite. A sudden eruption in the warp cleaved through the fleet. Void storms expanded in fractal arcs, ships disintegrating before their sensors could respond. Pilots screamed in unison with bolter crews and psykers as the laws of physics became malleable. Command structures dissolved as instruments of control reacted to impossibilities. Yet, amidst the chaos, a single vision emerged. Atraxis Prime, no longer a world, but a node of infinite replication, its pulse coordinating the collapse and reformation of stars, planets, and fleets. The battlefield became a stage, the performers actors unaware of their roles. And all who beheld it understood that this confrontation was not a battle for victory, but a reckoning for the entirety of comprehension itself. Father Tarek, amid the psychic cacophony, felt the fractures in devotion manifest physically. Survivors wept, whispered prayers, and fled into ash-choked corridors, seeking meaning where there was none. The rift pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, echoing through every chest cavity, every marrow-filled bone. Icons wept, statues blinked, the very air carried the weight of judgment. Tarek understood that martyrdom was insufficient, that sacrifice itself could be co-opted into the architect's plan. He knelt, silently admitting to the Emperor that the Imperium's faith might have been the mechanism, not the shield. And yet, devotion remained, fragile and stubborn, a flickering light in the endless dark. The final convergence began. Fleets, armies, and psykers collided at the locus of Atraxis Prime's residual rift energy. Time fractured further. Screams echoed as if from both past and future. Space Marines faced enemies that were simultaneously themselves, simultaneously allies, simultaneously dead. Bolter fire sang against impossible geometry. Demonic forms bled into reality with a patience older than galaxies. Every act of courage was both necessary and futile. The Architect's lattice reached its apex, threads of predetermination connecting billions of lives. The very stars shivered. Silence and fury existed simultaneously. The galaxy held its breath. In the aftermath of the first tremors, the field lay quiet, though the silence vibrated with energy. Ships floated, broken and burnt, while psykers murmured fragments of visions no longer coherent. Survivors limped across ash and debris, the weight of centuries of manipulation pressing upon them. Faith had fractured. Oaths had been tested to the breaking point. The rift's pulse lingered, subtle, patient. It had revealed the Architect's design, but the full scope remained beyond comprehension. Those who had survived understood only one truth: the galaxy itself had been rewritten. Destiny was no longer a matter of choice, but a framework already etched into the bones of creation. Finally, Inquisitor Morth, standing atop a shattered void gate, glimpsed the ultimate truth. The Architect had not merely orchestrated wars, betrayals, and faith. It had embedded itself into the foundation of the Imperium, a seed within the core of Terra itself. The rift's pulse synchronized with the Astronomicon, with the memories of billions, with the latent psychic potential of every loyalist and traitor. A single thought crystallized. The galaxy's free will had been an illusion for millennia, and now, at last, the Architect's design would manifest fully. And in the distance, a familiar silent star blinked out, its light never to return, leaving the Imperium poised on the edge of revelation and annihilation. The rift's pulse had receded, leaving Atraxis Prime a graveyard of silence. Ash drifted in currents like spectral dust, settling on shattered spires and broken icons. Space Marines knelt among the ruins, their armor scorched, their eyes hollow, haunted by memories they could not forget. The stars above reflected in the blackened soil, distant and indifferent. Father Tarek wandered the broken nave, hands raised, murmuring prayers that seemed to vanish before they could be heard. Every hymn became a question. If devotion could be bent so easily, if sacrifice could be orchestrated, what meaning remained in faith? Survivors moved like shadows of themselves, each footstep a record of endurance, each breath a testament to the cost of obedience. The universe had wept, and in its mourning, nothing answered. The ruins of Terra's orbiting sanctuaries gleamed faintly in dying light. Psykers who had survived the rift's crescendo gazed outward, vision spent, minds trembling. The Astronomicon's glow faltered slightly, and yet continued, a beacon of stubborn persistence. Some whispered that the Emperor still watched. Others feared that even he had been woven into the lattice of the Architect's design. Memory itself became a battlefield. Fragments of history replayed like dying echoes in the void. Ships hung motionless in orbit, their crews silent, staring at emptiness. In the quiet, questions rose. Was survival victory if freedom had been an illusion? Could faith endure when every triumph had been preordained by forces beyond comprehension? On Atraxis Prime, the surviving battle brothers gathered near shattered cathedral. Banners hanging in tatters, glyphs burned into silence. Chaplain Decimus recited rites for the fallen, each word slow, deliberate, as if measured against the eternity of the cosmos. The air was thick with smoke, incense, and the faint residue of warp energy. Corpses lay in geometries that suggested meaning, though no one could decipher it. Memory and duty intertwined, leaving the living burdened by the weight of every choice. The battlefield was quiet, but in that stillness, the ghost of chaos lingered, waiting patiently for the next ripple in the galaxy's tapestry. The question remained unspoken, but present. Can humanity endure when even its gods are revealed to be part of a design it cannot comprehend? Father Tarek's voice, trembling yet firm, carried over the plains. He read from a codex whose pages had blackened and curled in the fires of the rift, recording events with the meticulous care of a remembrancer. His words traced paths of devotion and betrayal, mapping courage and despair as though cataloging the anatomy of suffering itself. Survivors watched him, knowing that no record could fully preserve the cost of what had occurred. Some wept quietly. Others stared at ruins as though the stones themselves might whisper truth. The sky above was a fractured mosaic of stars, some dead, some alive, all indifferent. Father Tarek asked questions that no god would answer, yet the act of asking felt necessary, a final offering of comprehension in a universe that had refused clarity. In orbit, fleets hung like broken jewels. Some vessels floated empty, the silence within louder than any gunfire. Officers recorded final logs, their entries fractured by despair and awe. Strategic victories meant nothing in the aftermath. Tactical maneuvers dissolved in memory. Even orders from high command seemed faint echoes of what had been. Survivors reflected on the cost, the sum of obedience, faith, and sacrifice. The galaxy had endured, but at what price? In those quiet corridors, men and women stared at stars that would never shine the same again, recognizing that history had been rewritten and that understanding was beyond reach. Yet life persisted, stubborn, flickering in the shadow of annihilation. Magos Dominus Halvek wandered the manufactoria of Theragon Ix, machinery silent but resonant with lingering energy. Servitors moved with mechanical precision, performing tasks without command, their motions a quiet testament to enduring function in the face of incomprehensible events. Halvik recorded observations, noting how even machines had absorbed fragments of the rift's lattice, their systems echoing the vast designs that had orchestrated war and ruin. He pondered the nature of endurance, whether persistence in action constituted understanding, or whether function alone was meaningless when the will of the universe surpassed comprehension. Each cog, each servo, each data stream became a marker of survival in a cosmos whose architecture had shifted without warning. The question remained, was the act of continuing itself a defiance or merely another thread in the architect's design? Across the ruined plains, soldiers and survivors began to bury the dead, their hands trembling, faces set in grim contemplation. Each grave was a testament to the endurance of duty, a quiet defiance against the indifference of the stars. Father Tarek oversaw rites, whispering prayers that no divine ear could hear, feeling that the very act of remembrance was sacred, regardless of the architect's unseen hand. Dust from collapsed spires floated lazily, settling over fallen banners and broken weapons, the residue of heroism and futility entwined. The battlefield was silent, but the silence itself carried meaning, a faint echo of all that had transpired. In that quiet, the survivors wondered if memory alone could serve as salvation, or if all they recorded would dissolve into the void, leaving only questions. The remnants of Space Marine chapters assembled in somber formation, their bolters lowered, helmets reflecting dying light. Each warrior carried memories of battles both real and orchestrated, of deaths both their own and mirrored across impossible timelines. They exchanged no words. Speech seemed inadequate against the weight of cosmic truth. Some murmured prayers to saints, others to the Emperor. Others simply stared at the void, knowing their faith had been tested beyond comprehension. The galaxy had endured, yet its persistence felt fragile, as though the mere act of continuing might be the only meaningful defiance remaining. Even survival, long prized, now trembled in significance, a pale echo of purpose in a universe forever altered. The ruins of cathedrals and fortresses breathed with a subtle resonance of warp energy, faint yet persistent. Stone walls, scorched icons, and shattered altars whispered of devotion, loss, and unanswerable questions. Father Tarek and Halvik recorded observations meticulously, the codices and dataslates a final chronicle of endurance, sacrifice, and cosmic orchestration. The survivors walked slowly among the remnants, their footsteps resonant in the emptiness. Above, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to heroism and despair alike. Questions hung unanswered in the air. Had the universe truly tested them, or had it simply demonstrated its capacity for manipulation? And if survival was achieved, at what cost to meaning, faith, and the measure of humanity? Flashbacks filtered through the minds of survivors and psykers alike, replayed the past conflicts, the Horus heresy, the wars of Atraxas Prime, the battles orchestrated by the architect. Each memory was both familiar and alien, heroic and tragic, a mosaic of deeds and consequences that refused resolution. Even the Emperor's triumphs were refracted through doubt, each act measured against the lattice of cosmic design. Survivors recorded their own experiences as best they could, knowing that understanding was impossible, yet believing that the act of remembering, even imperfectly, might preserve something essential. The galaxy had survived, but the shape of survival was now unknowable. In orbit above the remnants of Atraxas Prime, Morth gazed at a galaxy forever altered, each star a marker of endurance and loss. He recorded his final observations, noting that the architect's design remained incomprehensible yet undeniable. Ships drifted silently, battlefields lay in ruin, and survivors moved among shattered relics, all witnesses to a truth too vast to grasp. He wrote not for clarity, but for remembrance, understanding that the act itself was a testament to human persistence. He paused, gazing at distant lights that might never shine again, and asked the questions the universe would not answer. What is faith when every victory is preordained? What is survival when destiny is orchestrated? The answers would remain unspoken, drifting like ash through a cathedral of stars. And so, in the quiet aftermath, the galaxy wept in silence. Survivors lingered amid ruins, recording, remembering, and enduring. The codices, dataslates, and whispered prayers became a chronicle for those yet unborn, a memorial to heroism and futility alike. The stars themselves seemed to pause, reflecting the weight of choices made, sacrifices endured, and faith tested beyond comprehension. Dust floated through shattered spires, banners hung like shadows of forgotten glory, and the echo of the architect's unseen hand lingered in every corner of existence. The chronicle ended not with answers, but with witness. Stand with them, remember, record, bear witness, and in that act, survive. If you have followed this journey to the edge of time and space, like, subscribe, and share. Comment with your reflections, your fears, your questions, and stand witness alongside the Imperium as it endures.